Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
Everyone, I am so excited to finally interview Daniel Weisfield. Daniel is the co-founder of 3 Pillar Communities, a top 50 owner of mobile home parks in the country. They currently have 42 mobile home parks in 7 states, spanning roughly 4,200 pads. And true story, I've been wanting to interview Daniel for a while. I was just waiting for the right topic. And thanks to Daniel's wonderful LinkedIn presence, I'm also really big on LinkedIn. I see all of his posts. He had one recently that was just perfect for mobile home parks in real life. You see, for the most part, we address topics for intro to small, medium-sized mobile home park players, and one glaring spot of omission, if you will, is, well, what about the larger players? What about folks with thousands and thousands of lots? So as of this recording, I don't quite have 2,000 units yet. And like I've alluded to on other episodes, it's going to take a lot of things in the right places to go from 2,000 really even to 3,000, nonetheless 4,000 and change. So Daniel, as he continues to scale, allows the perfect opportunity to discuss what happens, what goes into it when you really want to hit that scale. And most importantly, for the majority of listeners here who haven't bought their first yet or only own a couple hundred mobile home lots, or maybe less than 2,000, the majority of listeners here, what can they learn from this process Daniel has gone through to get here and to get to that next level? So like one of my favorite books, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. That's what we're going to talk about today. Daniel, I am so excited. How are you doing?
I am so excited to be on your show, Ryan. I'm a huge fan of yours. I've been following you on LinkedIn, watching your podcast, just waiting for the day when will Ryan Norris finally invite me on your podcast? So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm really excited to talk mobile home parks, which is my favorite topic.
Let's jump right into it. Let's start with your background. So sure. Wicked impressive. I'll do the bragging for you. You are a multiple graduate of Yale University. Wow. JD, MBA, undergrad, the works. You've worked in U.S. government as an assistant to the Director of National Intelligence. Wow. The list goes on. Daniel, tell everyone a bit about who you are, where you came from, and how you got here today.
So none of the stuff you just mentioned really captures who I am or what I'm doing today. So if I'm going to be really honest, if I think about where I came from and how I got here, I come from an immigrant family that came to the U.S. with nothing from Israel. My mother and grandfather were both born on a chicken farm in Israel. That's where my mom grew up, taking care of chickens and counting eggs. Immigrated to the US to seek economic opportunity in the land of the free. And my grandfather worked as a car mechanic when he got here, fixing wrecked cars in his backyard just to put food on the table. And he saved money fixing cars, and eventually he opened a mechanic shop, and he saved money from that, and eventually he bought a mobile home park around 40 years ago. So if I think about really who I am and the essence of that, it's those values that I got from my immigrant family, that work ethic, that entrepreneurial hustle. And so, yeah, I was very fortunate to go on and study at Yale. I got a law degree. I got an MBA. I worked as a diplomat. I worked at McKinsey doing strategy consulting. Those are all, fancy places, you could say. And, I did okay in those places, but in some ways I felt out of place. Like I had that hustle and that grit and that grind, and I always wanted to do things that were a little bit off the beaten path. And so when I finally quit corporate life and got into mobile home parks, it felt like the right thing. It felt really like expressing my values.
I love to hear that because I got my MBA as well, not from Yale, great, good school, Wake Forest University, not Ivy though. Boy, everybody is talking about Deloitte, McKinsey.
Yeah.
What are the big prestigious next places to go to? And
Yeah.
it's all about rank and would you get on the GMAT and all this jazz. And then you realize some of the most wealthy people you'll meet, some of the happiest, most productive people you'll meet, didn't even go to college.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
it's such a focus on the wrong thing.
Yeah, 100%.
I love how when you go through the bullet points of your resume, the ones that have that glitz and glamour aren't the ones that you attribute to your success. You look at how you were raised, where you came from. Uh, Listen, and more importantly than that, what I'm starting to realize is that people who really hit that next level of success, it comes down to this, really this simple. They find something they love doing that they're good at, and that's all they do. They don't focus on the next shiny object. They pick where they feel the best, where they feel right, like you just said, and then they just go gung ho.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, thinking about those values I learned from my family, I've never told this story before, definitely not on a podcast, but when I was 8 years old, I'd go stay with my grandfather in the summers in Seattle, and I would go visit his mobile home park or visit his mechanic shop. And it'd always be like, Daniel, get the hammer. We're going to fix the bumper. We'd start banging it out. And he'd be like, I don't want you to work with your hands, but I want you to have the feeling. I want you to know what it is. And those are the things that really stuck with me, right? Those formative lessons I learned as a kid from my family. Yeah, much more so than what I learned at Yale.
Listen, I love that. You remind me of the movie The Karate Kid with the whole wax on, wax off montage. Yeah. I was having this conversation with someone recently where they said, like, why do you do things like your own accounting? Why do you do some of the minutia? And my answer is always wax on, wax off, right? It's not necessarily the sexy stuff. You don't necessarily want to outsource everything because you want to build that really basic foundation. So in that scene where he goes to the karate master and he goes, when are you going to teach me all these fancy punch and kicks? And he goes, boom, you know how to block, you've been doing it the whole time. And that's exactly what you were getting from your grandfather. On the one hand, you're like, why am I swinging this hammer? And on the other hand, he is helping build that foundation for you to get to the next level. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, obvious question before we get in, national intelligence, any lessons there to be applied to entrepreneurship in mobile home parks?
100% yes. The lesson is get the heck out of bureaucracy and make decisions quickly. And I learned that firsthand as a member of a highly bureaucratic organization. And just, 30 seconds of American history here, right? 9/11 happened. We were attacked on our own soil by a terrorist threat. Massive intelligence failure. Congress did a big inquiry, right, and had the whole 9/11 commission saying, how did we spent so much money on the CIA and the FBI and the NSA. How did we miss this? And they said, all right, we need to create a new layer of bureaucracy called the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to sit over all intelligence agencies and coordinate them. So I was a part of this extra layer of bureaucracy, supposedly fighting the problem of bureaucracy. And it really felt like we were pushing a lot of paper in circles, at least from where I sat. So by the time I left there, I had strengthened my resolve to go be an entrepreneur.
This is the perfect transition into the core of what I want to talk about with you today, which is what got you here won't necessarily get you there. And what will get you there will rely on outsourcing. So while you're small, it makes sense to swing the hammer, the proverbial hammer, so to speak, so you can gain that at least entry-level knowledge so you can be dangerous. But ultimately, you want to put someone else to work in that role who wants to be in that role, who will always be better than you at said role. But you risk building exactly what you were working in, which is a slow moving bureaucracy. From a high level, Daniel, how are you thinking as you are setting up to scale?
So I didn't realize this is going to be the focus, and this is exactly what I'm thinking about all the time these days. So this is great. I am just realizing the possibilities now of what it means to hire people who are, much smarter than me and more capable than me in their various areas of expertise, and bring them onto our team and get them on board with our vision and our values, and then empower them to go run and do their thing. And this is new for me, right? Because I worked in the government, and then I worked in the corporate world for a while, and then 2017 I started Three Pillars to be a real estate entrepreneur. And when we started, we were lean and mean, right? It was me and my business partner, who was my wife's brother, and we were both basically living off our wives' salary in the beginning to try and make this thing work. And just the two of us doing everything as owner operators, right? Forming the LLC, buying the park, getting the insurance, hiring the on-site manager, dealing with tenants, coordinating contractors. I mean, we investor relations, the whole deal. And we operated that way for several years. And it was a great foundation, because now when I call a park owner, because I'm trying to buy their park, and they've owned it in their family for 50 years, and they know it inside and out, and they know where every single sewer line is located, and they know the ins and outs of every single single wide and double wide on that property, I can talk to them with legitimacy because I've been there and I've done it. I was in the trenches. That being said, starting as a hands-on operator kind of can trap you in a mindset of doing things yourself. And we were so used to doing things ourselves that my partner and I have spent a lot of time doing things that we should no longer be doing. And I think we can have a discussion about, how do you know when you've reached that point? How do you know when you should be outsourcing? Because I think at this point, I've now learned how powerful it is to bring on new people. And we have enough scale that we can afford to bring on more people. So I've hired, at this point, we have roughly 60 employees. Roughly 18 are on our headquarters team, and the rest are out in the field managing our properties. And so on our headquarters team, I have an awesome CFO who we hired recently, a great head of manufactured home sales, operations people, a head of financial planning and analysis. So I've now built a great team around me. But if I could go back and do it again, I would have hired more people faster and kind of transitioned faster to doing less things myself. And I don't think I'm at any, by the way, just to answer one other thing you said, I don't see myself as being at any risk right now of building a slow moving bureaucratic organization. I mean, we're still, even with 60 employees, we're lean and mean and scrappy. And I feel like we're in like the second inning of the ball game. I mean, we're just getting started. So I feel like we still have a very entrepreneurial culture. Maybe when I get to 300 employees, I'll start worrying about being slow and bureaucratic.
So that's interesting. And that's one big thing that Ian really pushes me on is, you're way too in the weeds, dude. We need to start outsourcing. For me, I had no money, no network, and no experience. I had no choice up front. But at a certain point in time, you have to realize your own character flaws, which for me, I tend to lean towards perfectionism and a little bit of micromanagement. And I have to let that go. So it's very good to hear that you've dealt with something very similar. I mean, this is our business. This is us. There's no one else to point the finger at if things go wrong when it's your business. So I love to hear that there is a trap, if you will, of doing things solo that are eventually no longer worth your time. The Tim Ferriss proverbial $1, $2, $10, $20 activity concept. So by wearing many hats, though, the flip of that is, by wearing those hats, by gaining that experience, by being dangerous in a whole lot of different fields, you hire better, you manage better, you create better systems, you cold call better. I love that. It's true. You have a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
So in other words, there is a sweet spot where you overdo it in terms of doing lower value activities for too long, but you can't not do them and still be as effective a manager, a hirer, a systems builder, a cold caller. Daniel, where is that threshold? Where do you feel, looking backwards now, did you cross that line where it's like, I need to hire someone now? It's too much.
I think by the time we got to 5 parks, it was time to hire an operations person, a director of operations, you could say, to oversee park managers and oversee tenant issues and day-to-day tasks. And I would say that from the time we had 3 parks or 5 parks, it made sense to have someone else do the bookkeeping and accounts payable and a lot of the routine financial stuff, and let us just review it. And you mentioned that trap of getting trapped into the owner operator mindset and thinking too small. And here's where the rubber really hits the road, and where my partner Yoel and I have had a ton of debates. Where the rubber hits the road is, do you hire staff based on what your current revenue can support? Or do you hire people you can't afford yet, making a bet on yourself that you're going to grow into them? And this is where we have had a ton of debates. And my partner Yoel is more financially conservative than I am, which is actually a great part of our partnership. He's a CPA. He's great at numbers. He perceives risk. He's very analytical. And I am like the growth guy. I see unbound opportunity, and Yoel sees risk, and together we come to the right place. So this is a really healthy partnership. And Yoel, wearing his CPA hat, says, we can't hire 3 more people right now. We don't have the money coming in. And I'm like, well, let's hire them so we can do more deals so that we will have the money coming in, and we can do more deals than that. And, that is a deliberate strategic choice that every business owner has to make, right? I don't think there is a right answer. There is a more conservative choice and there's a more aggressive choice. And some people are going to have, the right answer will vary depending on your circumstances, your deal pipeline, your access to capital, your ability to execute your business plan, your ability to manage well. I think those are all factors that determine how quickly you should hire. And I look at, one really good entrant in our business, based in Utah. They were, they got into the space a few years ago, sophisticated operators in other businesses, sophisticated entrepreneurs. They didn't really know MH, but they said, we're going to start an MH platform a few years back. First thing they did was hire an awesome team. Before they ever did a deal, they said, we're building for scale. And they hired a head of operations and a head of finance and a head of marketing and a head of home sales. And they built the team, right, in order to enable them to scale. And I think Sun Communities, which is the biggest public REIT in our space, I've heard from a lot of folks who work at Sun that they do the same thing. They build an awesome team kind of ahead of their current needs, knowing that it will enable more growth. And so I would encourage more smaller owner operators to think that way.
Yeah, a lot of the bigger folks I've talked to offline say the exact same thing. And I am on your side of the argument too, by the way, which is you hire before you need to. And the right answer is the opportunities. If the opportunities exist, then it was the right call. If they don't, it was the wrong call. And no one has that crystal ball to see into the future. You just have to create your thesis and believe, and then be optimistic enough to go out there and make that dream come true. And it all comes down to risk. Everybody wants to have perfect information that does not exist. That's where the big bucks are made, when you can make those risks consistently, overcome your own fear, analysis paralysis, and over optimism, and make ultimately the correct call. Does it make sense to go for it on 4th and 1? Analytics will give you an answer, but the truth is, did you get the first down or did you turn the ball over?
Yeah.
And that it will guide everything. So you have to have conviction around what you make on that call. So I love to hear that. That's a great debate to have. And I'm curious to hear, go ahead.
And I would just say, we've had those debates, right? And here we are. I mean, literally, I don't want to glorify this. I hope you don't put this in like the show notes, but for the first couple of years, we're working like 18-hour days. I mean, literally, like we wake up with the kids, we work until like 5 or 6, try and take some time off with our wives and our children, which is a clear priority for us, get the kids in bed. And then we're back on working from, 8 p.m. till midnight, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. I mean, long hours this first few years. It was a slog. So here we are working ourselves to the bone. And Yoel and I are having these debates about should we hire someone? And then we hire someone and it's like growing a third arm. Yeah. Seriously, like you had 2 hands your whole life and now you have a third hand who can do all these things. And you're like, why didn't we do this earlier? Like, what were we thinking? This is enabling. This is literally freeing us up to do work that only we can do and that we're really good at. And I would tell you, we made that choice to hire. The first one was an director of operations. That was kind of clear, obvious business need. Then a head of manufactured home sales. That was a clear need because, folks who might be new to the industry might not realize you talk about infill and bring homes in. Every single home you bring in, it's like 40 hours of work. Talk to the factory, place the order, talk to the contractor, talk to the setup guy, talk to the electrician, talk to the city, talk to the customer, right? It's probably 40 hours of work for each home, right? So we brought in a manufactured home head of sales, head of finance. That stuff was all kind of clear and obvious. Then we were like debating, do we bring in a head of acquisitions? Like Yoel and I are good at that. We like acquisitions. I don't know, do we really need an acquisitions person? We hired an acquisitions person. Boom, it was like night and day. He's so good, so smart, helps us analyze things at a much better level. We do more thorough due diligence. We can process more deals. It used to be we'd get deals in the pipeline and like the bottleneck was us analyzing them, right? We want to get back to brokers and be responsive, but we didn't have time to do the analysis. And now we're cranking out analysis on 3 deals a day. So we sprung for the acquisitions guy. And then the last hire I made where I was really debating was a personal assistant for myself, where it kind of felt like a luxury. Like we have limited payroll dollars. I don't know. I don't see myself as the CEO in the corner office. I see myself as a scrappy mobile home park operator. So I kind of didn't want to give myself that indulgence. I thought there might be higher and better uses of that payroll money. And then I am thrilled to report that about a month ago, I hired an amazing woman named Stephanie Colley. Hi, Stephanie. I hope you listen to this. And she is my new right-hand lady and takes care of so many things for me. And I'm so grateful and I'm more productive than ever. So it really is a journey of figuring out what are you going to allow yourself to invest in? And in my experience, each time you invest in that next hire, it's like a level up in your sense of freedom and focus.
Well, it's exhilarating too, by the way. To know that with all the complaints and people crapping on each other on Facebook about political views they truly don't know anything about, it's really nice to actually go start your own business and to make the United States of America better because you're a small employer and you're employing people and you're helping the economic engine with your own 2 hands, not by complaining to one of your relatives on Facebook, right? So I love that. And I got to tell you that the best moments for me as an entrepreneur are almost always around hiring or just knowing that you are making someone's life better because the work environment's better, they enjoy what they're doing, and you're putting them in a position to do what they love to do and they are good at.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's awesome. For a minute here, I actually want to zoom in a little bit. And by the way, I love that because I'm kind of you're several steps ahead of where I am. And I've already had those same, like, is it time to hire an assistant? Is it time to hire? The
answer is yes. The answer is yes. Do it.
I think I'm leaning towards yes. We just hired a CFO and it's just mind-boggling to me that how talented this guy is. I told my wife, if I go back to right after I graduated from college, changed my major too, by the way, to accounting and finance, and then literally just worked every single day on this until I was this individual's age, I would still not be as good as he was. And he loves it. That is, to me, is just, I already suffer from imposter syndrome, not feeling like I deserve to be where I'm at. It makes it a little bit worse going, oh, wow, this person is so talented. And, and I'm not. But at the same time, it is so wonderful to have that baseline of understanding how to put together a balance sheet, a depreciation schedule, amortization tables, all the basics of accounting, and then having someone come in and speak intelligently to them and then have them take it to that next level that you're never going to get to. And if you're hiring it out, as in someone outside of your organization, you're at the whim of whatever you can hire who's possibly going to price gouge or this or the other thing. Whereas you have someone, they are part of the team, and more so than that, you can even work out ways to give people equity and part of the profitability of what you do, which is even more exciting because it gets people excited and you're spreading the wealth out. So I love to hear all of that. Daniel, I want to take a little bit of a pivot. If you don't mind, I actually want to get a little bit more nitty gritty with this. So if you don't mind, let's spend some time around, you listed off a couple of positions you hired in the order you hired them. Can you talk a little bit more about what these roles are and maybe not necessarily how much time it freed up for you or stress, but that moment where you were like, wow, how did I not do this so long ago? Let's go through in a little bit more detail that progression. So your first hire, it sounds like, was a director of operations.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So I think the way I think about the business is there's probably 10 functions that every real estate investor is doing, and they may or may not be aware of it. And if you are, a one woman or a one man shop, just managing a couple properties, you're doing all these things, you're not even aware of it. And we were doing all of them initially in the beginning. And as we've grown, there's, what's the word in economics? Kind of the fruits of the specialization of labor. I'm forgetting what the right term is here. But as you grow, you realize it makes sense to differentiate roles. And so at this point, I think of our business as being property operations. That's the key, right? That's where, you execute the business plan or you don't. And I think that's what really differentiates good operators from not good operators. And kind of the next big function for us is manufactured home sales, right? To me, that's the single biggest way to upgrade our assets and improve the real estate is bringing in new homes, right? So that's a big function. The third function is acquisitions. Some people might think of that as being first, kind of ahead of operations, but to me, operations is the meat of the business and acquisitions is, also a priority. The fourth is investor relations and marketing, which we haven't done a very good job at. I'm still kind of wearing that hat. I'm thinking now of trying to bring in a marketing person as the next big hire or maybe outsourcing it. And my dream would be to eventually get an investor relations person to have investor chats with new investors. And then the fifth function is like all the back office stuff, finance, HR, administration, right? Administration being like LLC filings and renewals and dealing with cities and setting up phone service and all that kind of stuff. And then maybe the sixth function is strategy, right? That's something that the owners and the leaders really should be spending time on, thinking about what are we good at, what are we bad at, what's next. Let me add another function, capital projects. Once you get big enough, it makes sense to specialize. We had a head of capital projects for a while who executed all our big projects, and that was awesome. He had to leave because of a health issue. So those are kind of how I see the functions within the business. If you're a one-person operator, you're doing all those things yourself. And yeah, my first hire was a director of operations to oversee park managers. And as we've grown, we've hired regional managers in between that director and the community managers.
I couldn't agree more. Listen, mobile home parks are potentially very high margin businesses. So you can afford to not be really, really good as an operator for a time. If you don't have good operations and scale, it just completely falls apart. And I've seen people make this mistake again and again and again over the years where they focus on growing. And as business school teaches you, as I'm sure Yale did, give you a litany of case studies of growing too fast without proper systems and processes and people in place. The general strategy I've seen people get in a lot of trouble around is acquiring way too fast. And then eventually when they can support it, hire a director of operations and basically throw them a hot mess, like quite literally a dumpster fire, and go, all right, now go fix it. I'm paying you 100, 150, 200 grand a year. And you're basically giving someone an impossible challenge. Then you start to see turnover and other issues from there. So it's definitely refreshing, Daniel, by the way, as a slight aside, to hear that your operations first, because yeah, you might have some cushion with it being potentially higher margin, but you want these things humming along, because if you have good operations, it allows you to scale. It allows you to hire more people, more talented folks, put in better systems. And ultimately you are shifting the focus of a mobile home park as a security that you're selling to an investor, and more as what it actually is, which is a place that people reside in. And I think I see too many people come in trying to basically hype up investors and sell the dream of high returns, and just completely miss the fact that we have an affordable housing crisis in our country, and that these folks deserve to be treated right. And I love to hear that. Let's spend a couple minutes if we
Sorry,
can.
Oh yeah, can I stick on that point real quick?
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Ryan, but acquisitions don't keep me up at night. Right? It's operations that keeps me up at night.
Oh,
right. I never stay up at night worrying about, am I going to get that deal or not get that deal? That's just gravy. That's just growth. Yep. Right? Growth is fun. Everyone likes growth. That's fun stuff. I'm not worried about that. What keeps me up at night is operations and wondering, is something going to slip through the cracks? And just here's a real live example. This week we did our quarterly asset review, where Yoel and I, as the co-founders of the company, who are on the line to our investors to deliver results, sit down with our property management team, our finance team, our manufactured home sales team, and review every property in our portfolio in minute detail once a quarter to see how we're doing against hitting our business plan. And during that review, I realized that at one of our parks, which is mostly tenant-owned homes, we've been buying some homes from tenants and converting them to park-owned home rentals. And I just wanted to do a little check and verify, are all those park-owned home rentals on our insurance policy? And my ops team said, yeah, I think so. And then I emailed our insurance guy and he gave me a list of what's on the policy, and like half of them weren't on the policy. And I was like, it was like 4 or 5 homes. I admit it, our bad, right? It fell through the cracks. And I realized we didn't have a good system to make sure that every time we pick up a park-owned home, it was getting to the right people on the finance team to go to the insurance guy. And like, that's the stuff that keeps me up at night, right? So we have been very deliberate not to grow too fast so that we can get our house in order. I always think about building the right foundation before we build the tower. And at this point, we're talking about scale. I think I've gone from a small, scrappy operator to a reasonable, medium-sized operator. I think we're number 40 in the US in terms of lot count. We have about 60 employees, maybe 70 employees at this point. And we've made a bunch of investments in key hires right now in order to go from, medium to national, right? We've made deliberate investments about building that foundation before we start adding, layers to the building.
Excellent comment, by the way. Let's take a second, if you will, to zoom in a little bit on how you're able to avoid bureaucracy when it comes to things like operations. Like I mentioned on my podcast, I think the flaw in the mobile home park Bible, if you will, is you have one property manager who makes $10 an occupied site, and you ask him to do everything: violations, collections, project management. I mean, the list goes on. And you're asking someone who's getting paid basically a barely part-time salary to do way too many things. And every acquisition you have, you're going to have another on-site person to be good at like 50 things. And what I really enjoy hearing about you and what you guys have put together is you've put people who are really good at really a handful of things, and you put them in position to win. As you scale up, how does that look? Because are you going to have a director of sales and the next hire is someone under them? Or eventually do you have a director of sales in each of your 7 states and then they all report up to you or report to someone? How does that infrastructure look for something like director of sales or investment relations? How do you scale up without creating bureaucracy, or at least minimizing it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the area where I'm most worried about this is the operations side. And so I'll address that instead of addressing sales or investor relations or whatever. So our key has been hiring really good regional managers who are like ninjas. And we are willing to invest a lot of money to get really good talent in that regional role. And we screen really heavily for self-starters who think like owners in the regional role. We love to have community managers who think like owners. That's part of our company values, and that's absolutely something we encourage at the community manager level. But it is essential at the regional manager level. And so we have regional managers who are highly empowered. Many of them come from either like the apartment management world or other industries that have, on average, higher standards and more professional operating practices than mobile home parks have historically had. And they're in there, managing their P&Ls and their teams like they're their own assets. And so they are kind of, in my mind, the community managers are the most important people in our company because they're frontline, right? They are the ones who can really make or break the value as the community manager. But the regional manager has a critical role because they're the ones incentivizing the community managers, training the community managers, making sure that the community managers understand the business plan and are bought in. So the regional managers are, in my mind, like key infrastructure for enabling community managers to hit our business plan. And so as we grow, I think we're going to keep hiring awesome regional managers. And I want to keep it pretty flat. Our regional managers, they report to our director of operations, but there's also a dotted line to me in yellow. It's flat, and the regional managers all know they can come to the owners and co-founders of the company anytime. And so I'm in frequent discussion with our regional managers, and that's what makes me feel like I'm still close to the assets and close to the operations. I don't want it to be all funneled through a director of operations because I'm scared I'll miss information on the ground.
Yeah, the more hands in the cookie jar, the trickier it gets. Before I hit go, you and I were talking about something that I'm going through right now, which all happened from bureaucracy. So it's no avoiding it. The question is, how much can you minimize it? And it sounds to me like if you pay up, if you will, to ensure you're getting a really talented, really bought in person, they can solve a lot of issues rather than they can be more proactive rather than reactive.
I think so. Yeah, that's the bet we're making. And then the second half of that, which I mentioned, is making sure that the leaders of the company are still accessible to those regional managers.
By the way, I love the idea of a CapEx or project manager, if you will, because I think a lot of folks don't realize in this space how much project management there is. And then I'm not just talking bringing in a home, which is a project management thing in and of itself. I mean, we're going through a project right now where we're extending parking in one of our communities, and because we're basically going over grass, we have to have a gravel base, and we have to coordinate with a bunch of contractors, and prices are going crazy and labor is going crazy. And if you are paving, you have to wait for certain weather conditions, and it's just too much to put on potentially one person, even if it's a really talented regional manager, because in theory, eventually in scale, that will break down. So to have a dedicated person is a really good idea.
So I actually have really strong feelings about this. This goes back to the core point you were making about hiring people who are smarter than you and love what they do and know more than you do, so that you can do things that you're really good at. And so you've learned that lesson on the finance side. You hired a CFO, right? And he's rocking the finance for you. And now you're freed up to do other things. You should absolutely do the same thing for capital projects, because I think you don't have an engineering and construction background, right? From what I know about you, right? So you're sitting there thinking, I'm going to do a $100,000 paving project, and that's above my community manager's pay grade. It's not something they're going to do. And maybe I could put on my regional, but I think as the owner, I want to be responsible for it. This is a big thing, so I'm going to be responsible. What do you know about paving, dude? Like, you're running this big contract. How do you know the gravel base layer is the right base layer so this thing's going to last 20 years? You paid them $50,000 to put down a 2-inch layer of compacted asphalt. Are you sure they put down 2 inches and it was compacted properly? And are the angles correct? And were you checking it? Like, I don't know how to check that. We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on contractors, not actually knowing, are we getting the right spec and was it done right? And that's when I realized it is worth every penny to pay for a professional to run this stuff, which will free me up and actually get a better result.
I could not agree more, because I basically am doing exactly what you're saying right there, which is putting a lot of faith in folks to do the right thing. And while even if I came from a construction background, it's like going through medical school. Just because you're a podiatrist doesn't mean you're going to know anything about cardiovascular issues, right? Like, just you got your JD from Yale. Law is the same thing. Just because you're an expert contract lawyer doesn't necessarily mean you know anything about statutes in a local state, right? Like, there's just different
specialties,
it's
trades,
just different
areas.
specialties. So I love to hear that. And eventually in scale, it makes sense to bring on someone who just absolutely can bring that value. And I think one big reason, I hope you agree with me here, one big reason I'm glad I got my MBA isn't because I left being an expert in one particular area. It was that it made me knowledgeable about a whole bunch of different areas so I can start to ask the right questions. So for a project manager, if you will, bringing in someone that has that background, maybe they didn't build bridges or do X, Y, or Z specialty, but at least if they know what questions to ask or who to go to, like we learned when we got our respective MBAs, that's just a skill set and a knowledge base that is worth outsourcing once you hit that scale, especially if you want to really start to scale.
Yeah. And let me say one thing for folks who are listening. On this project management thing, you don't need to be big enough that you have budget to hire a full-time capital projects manager. You can outsource this stuff too. So we use a guy named Scott Jolly to manage our paving projects. You might have seen him on LinkedIn.
Yep. I know Scott.
Worth every penny. I am so happy to pay Scott and his company. All they do is, they do other things too, but they are experts in paving, and they run our paving projects, and they show up on site and make sure it's done right. And I am thrilled to pay him that money. And I recommend it highly. This was like a light bulb for me when I realized I could outsource capital projects management.
Let's pivot, because you said something interesting. You said eventually you want to hire someone for the strategy piece. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't think every business owner realizes that strategy is a function, right? You're so busy keeping the trains running on time and working on your deals and everything else that, probably at night when you're in bed or you're in the shower, your brain starts turning, you think about where's the business going to go. But I think it is worthwhile to be highly deliberate about strategy and then translate that into a vision and a culture and an action plan, right? That's if you're going to get somewhere good, you got to figure out where you're going and a path to get there, right? And so I don't always live this, but I try at least once a year and sometimes twice a year to sit down and write a strategy document about where are we now? Where do we see ourselves in 5 years? What's the path to get there based on our strengths and weaknesses? And so, I can give you a little more color here. Stuff I'm thinking about right now is, all right, we are good at mobile home parks. We're good at buying B and C parks and turning them around. We are also fine at buying stabilized stuff, although we're not as competitive with some of the bigger players who have a lower cost of capital. I've built a great operating team. We've got an entrepreneurial culture, but we still have some gaps in our process, which I want to fix, like that Parkland Homes example I mentioned. Where do I want to be? I want to grow. I want to keep growing. I want to, triple the value of our portfolio in the next 5 years, call it. And I don't think we get there by continuing to buy small B and C parks and turning them around, right? And so I'm thinking about what are the other strategic areas we could get into that are, kind of adjacent to our business, aligned with our core competencies. And so one of them is new park development. We are actively, we've closed on land to develop a new park in Bozeman, Montana, which will be 254 units. And we've got several other development deals in the pipeline. We're looking actively at RV parks, which is an adjacent space, similar in NH in some ways, but really different in other ways. And, frankly, I don't have the confidence right now to go buy a RV resort with nightly and weekly stays. I don't know how to operate it. So if we're going to do that, we have to, have a deliberate strategy, hire people, come up with a plan, right? So we're looking at that. We're thinking about chattel finance as something that, is a core part of our business. We deal with every day. Currently, we're sending all of our MH customers out to third parties. Is that a worthwhile area to get into to raise a fund to do homes finance? So yeah, I think about that stuff all the time. And eventually, this is not, hiring someone to do strategy is not it's not one of the first 5 hires. It's probably not one of the first 20. It's probably not the first 10 hires, but maybe around the 15th or the 20th hire, when you're at that scale, you hire someone to do strategy to work on these projects and come back with an action plan. And that's how you push your business forward.
That's interesting to me because I feel like the strategy always is born from the C-suite, from the co-founders, if you will, because to me, it's not just about building the biggest company possible. To me, it's about building a lifestyle that gives me what I want: autonomy, the chance to affect change and scale, and also bring on like people to have that entrepreneurial culture who want to grow this thing to a certain point. That is all born from me, the co-founder. And it is really interesting to hear, wait a minute, what if you outsource that too? So that's really got me thinking.
Right. Daniel. How many ideas do you have in your head or written down somewhere about all the awesome areas you'd like to take your business? And they're kind of pipe dreams. And if you had an extra, 40 hours in the week, you diligence it and figure out, make a plan, but you don't have that time because you're busy running a business.
Fair point. That alone may have made this entire episode, by the way. I love that.
I don't know. I look at you and all the things you're doing with, killer online marketing. I commend you for the way you are.
Thank you.
Building a presence by sharing real knowledge in the industry, right? You're sharing value add content that people want to see and informing people and educating, right? I see you doing that. I think you've launched a training program, right? So those are deliberate strategic choices you made. Right? You started out hustling and buying parks, right? You were an operator like me. You've made choices about that to bring your business in that direction. And there are probably a million other directions you're thinking about. And that to me, it makes sense to try and bring in more brain power any way you can. And that could be hiring an MBA student to do a project, right? On a fixed fee. It doesn't necessarily mean a W-2 hire.
Right.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. I heard someone say this once. It just blew my mind. I thought it was so spot on that you're talking to someone intelligent when they can make you go, So I'll pass that compliment on to you.
Intelligent or unintelligible. And you're like, I don't know. I don't know which one I am.
The better of those two. But yeah, I think you, as beyond mobile home parks, as a student of life in general, it's been my goal to try to surround myself with people who push the way I think, whether I want to be pushed or not, because brilliance happens when you allow yourself to be pushed in ways you don't want to be pushed, but it's better. So I love that. That was, to me, the best part of this interview so far. Daniel, to end off, I want to call out something you have on your LinkedIn, which are your interests. You have a little blurb about your interests. You say things like surfing, which is awesome. Surfing is one of the greatest joys on this earth, by the way, but that's a conversation for another day. A couple of things stood out to me that I want to see how you've either applied to mobile home parks or you really, your interests also vocationally and avocationally kind of merge. First and foremost, the obvious: languages. I am self-taught in Spanish, and it's been one of the best things I've ever done. And for mobile home parks and for life. You also mentioned wilderness conservation and building interfaith communities. Those three things really stood out to me. Daniel, how do those interests merge within your personal interests there merge within your business interests?
This is a fun, well-researched question, Ryan. Thanks for asking this. So you asked about languages, wilderness conservation, and building interfaith communities. So languages are a passion of mine. I speak Spanish, and then I learned Portuguese, and I can't say I'm fluent in these languages anymore, but I studied Chinese on a scholarship from the US government in Beijing, and I studied Indonesian, and I studied Russian, and I forgot it, and I learned some Hebrew. So I love languages. And in a very practical level, I speak Spanish with our tenants regularly, and I do tenant meetings in Spanish regularly. But I'd say more broadly, I learned languages because I love exploring, and I love meeting people and connecting with them and learning their stories. And you can do that much more authentically when you're speaking their language. And that's what I get from mobile home parks, right? I didn't get that when I worked at a fancy corporate job in McKinsey, right? It was kind of mainstream, and I was a W-2 employee, and it's a little bit different. And in mobile home parks, I feel like I'm exploring all the time and going to new towns I've never been to and connecting with people, learning their life stories, and trying to think creatively about how do we take a neglected asset and make it a great neighborhood for you and your kids, right? So I think languages are part of that interest in other people. Wilderness conservation. I mean, first of all, let me just put a plug. We only have one planet that we live on. I love this blue-green planet, and we are not treating it very well. So please, everybody, do your part, right? Like I love bears and wolves and whales and eagles, and I hope that our kids and our grandkids can see those things, right? And so in our parks, we try to conserve energy, conserve natural resources. We built a solar power plant at 2 of our parks. We're doing stuff on water conservation, where in California, there is no reason we should be spraying precious water to irrigate green lawns that when we can replace them with, water efficient landscaping. So we're really trying to do our part as environmental stewards within our properties. And the third one, building interfaith communities. I'm Jewish, my partner's Jewish. It's our religious faith is a huge part of our life. And we started this company in order to manifest our values in the world. Full stop, right? Like I don't see I don't draw a bright line between here's my religious beliefs where I try and think about being a good person in my relationship with God, and then, here's what I do in the business world, fighting in the trenches to make every dollar I can at every expense, right? I don't want that division. I want to feel a harmony within my being about what am I doing every day in my work life. And I believe that we are having a real impact in the world, strengthening people's lives, strengthening families, strengthening communities by providing stable neighborhoods. And I feel really good about that.
I love all of those answers. I thought that was really poignant, especially out of the gate when you said you love connecting with people. You take up an interest in people. And I think that's incredibly important. And I share that with you, which is exactly why I wanted to teach myself Spanish, so I could connect with someone, because words, I think, as a quick aside, I think we get it wrong in schools when we teach language in schools. And I don't mean that we teach language, I mean how we teach the language. Because when you go to school, you want to get an A, you want to pass the test. And how do you do that? You get the question correct, which is wrong, because when you speak languages, you will make mistakes, and lots of them, and sound stupid.
Yep.
I seriously sound very stupid when I speak Spanish, but here's the thing, it works. It works.
Yep.
And I think what we should be doing when we teach language is some type of immersion, which allows it to be okay to get wrong. Because ultimately, language isn't about getting it right or wrong. Language is about using spoken word or written word or hand signals to communicate a message so you can connect with someone. And if you want to sell a great product, you have to ultimately connect with the people you are selling the product to. And again, the product isn't the security you're selling to investors. The product is the affordable housing. So I love to hear that. I couldn't agree more. You also said you built a solar plant. We should probably have a whole episode on that. You're not the first I've heard of to do that, by the way. Fascinating idea for a lot of reasons, especially if you have direct build power. It can definitely ease the burden, and if nothing else, possibly make it more affordable to live in. So I love hearing that. And then also, as a fellow landowner, water happens a lot. So if you can be more efficient with it, especially if you can irrigate your properties better, I loved hearing that. And then the final point you had is manifesting your values into the world to strengthen these communities, which you really believe in. Daniel, I love hearing that, because that is what gets me up every single day and get excited about these mobile home parks, because mobile home parks are one of the last, if not arguably the last place where you get excited when someone knocks on your door. Right. When I grew up as a kid and the doorbell rang or someone knocked on the door, or the doorbell rang, or someone called, like, we were excited. Who's calling? Who's at the door? Now it's like, dude, is someone trying to sell me something? Like, what do you want? Why don't you just send me a text? Don't even call me. Send me a text.
Yeah.
And mobile home parks are one of the last places where folks are a community. I mean, I was in one of my communities the other day, and there was a stranger there, and I could tell, you know why? Because lot 5 walked out of his house and sat in his car and stared this guy down. He's the watchdog in that community.
Yeah.
Who is this guy? Yeah. What's going on here? Are my kids safe? Or the other kid?
Yeah.
These things. Oh my gosh. It's amazing to hear, Daniel, that you are taking your convictions, your values, and you're implementing them into the world. I love all of that.
Thank you. Doing my best, and, stumbling a lot and making a lot of mistakes as we go. But, like I said, it starts with a vision, right? We started with a vision of manifesting our values in the world through an affordable housing company. And now we're just trying to figure it out, how to do that.
Daniel, I am so glad to finally have had you on here. You delivered and some.
Thank you. This was great.
Excellent.
I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. Daniel, thanks again. How can people get in touch with you?
Check out www.threepillarcommunities.com. That's threepillarcommunities.com. And there's a little box saying, get in touch, join our mailing list. Click that link, and I'd love to hear from people.
Daniel, I want to thank you again. I'm going to drop that in the show notes. Loved having you, man. Seriously.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun, Ryan. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Entrepreneurs make mistakes, but with the overwhelming amount of free information out there, you don't have to be doomed to making those same mistakes. You just have to find a consolidated version of the most important information. What if I told you I'll gift you all of my DD mistakes I've made over the years for free? Just leave me a 5-star review, screenshot the review after it goes live, and email it to me at my website, archimedesgrp.com. Afterwards, join our Facebook group, Mobile Home Park Mastermind. You'll find hundreds of other mobile home park owners sharing ideas, contractors, and deals. It's free to join, and we would absolutely love having you join us.